Last week, we got the results of the 2024 election. And I know that most of you who are listening are concerned about what this means for you, your staff, and your students. So today, I want to hopefully give you some alternative ways to process what's happened and how you can refocus your energy going forward based on many of the things we commonly discuss in this podcast. So keep listening. There is so much we could talk about around this topic. I've been working on this episode for several days and found myself going on quite a few tangents. But I really want to keep things focused because most of us are already exhausted from filtering all of the things swirling around the universe. Specifically, I want to focus on a few things that draw from what we've previously discussed in past episodes, like emotions, our subconscious, energy management, and of course, stress management. And to keep us focused, and by us, mostly I mean me, I'm going to break it down into three sections: processing emotions, how people decide, and moving forward. All right, so let's dive in. Processing emotions. Let's talk about emotions. Last week, I sent folks on our newsletter a link to a great article in Scientific American titled "Election Grief is Real. Here's How to Cope." And I will put the link in the show notes because it's worth reading if you have a few minutes. Now, we've talked about the function of emotions before, and in a nutshell, emotions give us important feedback about ourselves and our environment. For example, sadness typically signals loss. Anger often signals a lack of boundaries. The emotion itself is supposed to get our attention so we can assess the situation. Did something make you happy? Woohoo! Then do more of that. Did something make you upset? Well, let's see what we need to do to navigate it so it's not so painful in the future. Now, the stories, aka beliefs, and we've talked about this before, that we have about ourselves, others, the world, absolutely impact the emotions that are going to show up for us. And a simple and topical example of that is a certain percentage of the population is absolutely thrilled about the outcome of this election, while others view it as a tragedy. It is the exact same event, but interpreted very differently based on how we feel about it. And it is important to honor our feelings and interpret the meaning behind them. But it can be easy to get trapped in our feelings, especially when they're connected to a story that isn't serving us. So I think I've mentioned before that Alicia often says, your emotions are real, but they're not reality. And that might seem dismissive, but we've all experienced this phenomena with students. Someone comes in all worked up because of a roommate issue or a situation with a professor. And on one hand, you absolutely understand why they would feel that way. But as they start to break down the situation, and maybe you get information from other parties, you start to see how their beliefs about what happened and their role in it aren't exactly serving them. Often our job is to help them get past the emotions so they can break down the situation in a way that allows them to move forward, to find a solution. So, how does that apply to us now? Ignoring our feelings or dwelling on them can cause problems for us and the folks around us, like our staff, students, families, and friends. In the article I mentioned earlier, the author interviewed Pauline Boss, who is an emeritus professor at the University of Minnesota, who spent 45 years as a psychotherapist and who coined the term ambiguous loss back in the 70s. She explains, with a more abstract kind of loss, there's no proof that you have lost trust in the world except your perception. And if you perceive it to be true, it is true for you that you're feeling helpless or powerless, that things didn't go your way. With frozen grief, you could be immobilized. That's the danger. Don't be immobilized. You need to do something active in order to deal with a situation you can't control. End quote. Again, emotions are biofeedback markers that let us know what's working, potential issues, and what needs to change. Now, true emotions only last for about 90 seconds. That's how long it takes them to pass through our body. If you feel an emotion longer than that, it's because you're getting lost in the story that is attached to that feeling. You tell yourself the story and you go back to that emotion over and over again. And like Boss explained, that can keep you frozen there, which isn't helpful. So at this point, it's been at least a week since most of the election results have come in, and I'm sure you're still having a lot of emotions about it. And my intent here is not to tell you that you're doing feelings wrong, but to help you understand that if you are still feeling a certain way about the situation, it's because of the stories you've attached to those feelings and to the outcome of the election. And per Boss, action is key to keeping you from getting stuck there. And one of the reasons getting frozen in those emotions isn't helpful is because it triggers a stress response, aka fight or flight, aka fight, flight, freeze, appease. And we've talked about this topic many, many times. When you go into fight or flight, your prefrontal cortex shuts down. That means your conscious brain isn't involved at all. You're 100% operating out of your subconscious, and the only thing your brain is focused on is surviving the immediate threat. You are literally unable to critically assess a situation, effectively solve problems, or find creative solutions. When you are in fight or flight, not only does the original thing loom heavy, but your RAS, your reticular activating system, is continually scanning the environment for anything that could be a possible threat. It views things that wouldn't bother you normally as suddenly having the potential of being a huge threat. And again, you cannot rationally talk yourself out of it until you get that nervous system regulated. It's just impossible. Much of the panic that I'm seeing on social media and in the media are fueled by fight or flight impulses and responses right now. And that's not to say there's nothing to be concerned about, but the stress response makes it feel worse. Plus, it requires a huge amount of energy. And if you're caught in this loop, that leaves you with little energy to actually come up with a game plan on how you're going to navigate the next 4 years and how you're going to get into action. Not to mention, our energetic states are contagious. Your staff and your students are looking to you for guidance. If they feel your dysregulation, they're likely to stay or become dysregulated too. Now, I'm going to talk about things you can do to move forward at the end, but I'm sure you already guessed that I'm going to talk about self-care. True. But right now, I want to talk about something that's probably also fueling your emotions. The people who seemingly voted for everything that you are opposed to. And to do that, we need to discuss how people decide. So when I have talked about the brain before, I've mentioned that your brain doesn't work the way you think it is. And if ever there was a time to appreciate this, it is now. You're probably feeling some strong emotions, and I'm putting that politely, about folks who may have voted for the very things that are sending you reeling. And it is easy to blame those individuals for how you're feeling right now. I know I've certainly found myself angry and frustrated with the people last week and even before that because I anticipated them not voting the way that I thought one should. But what has helped me avoid most of the anger, and again, helped me stay regulated, is by focusing on how people actually make decisions. So lately, I've been listening to quite a few marketing videos from Rory Sutherland, and he is a British advertising executive. And in fact, I actually decided hashtag connectedness, that I was going to start his book, Alchemy, the dark art and curious science of creating magic in brands, business, and life today. So, what distinguishes Rory? And I guess I've just watched enough videos that I feel comfortable calling him Rory at this point. But what distinguishes him from other people in the field is that he focuses on behavioral psychology, how people decide. And whether you're into marketing or human behavior, I recommend listening to his videos and definitely the book. He frequently talks about how economists, folks in finance departments, and political scientists make their projections, make their decisions based on the rational decisions they feel like people should make from a logical perspective. But the problem is, people do not make rational decisions. As he puts it, people aren't logical, they're psychological. People base their decisions on factors that they themselves most likely don't understand, and then they rationalize them after the fact. And when I say people, and when he is talking about people, he's talking about all of us, everyone, me, you, make decisions based on how you feel about XYZ. And even if you believe you're deciding something based on the facts, it is not the facts themselves, but rather how you feel about those facts that determine your decisions and actions. And we've talked about this before, including how neuroscientists discovered this very phenomenon while working with folks who had brain injuries to the emotional center of their brain. And people who have such injuries literally cannot make even the most basic decision because they can't feel which is the best option. You did not rationally decide to vote how you did. You did it because it was congruent with your subconscious mind, the programs that are in there, including your values and beliefs. You felt like that was the right decision. And it is easy to vilify the other side as being ignorant, racist, misogynistic, homo or transphobic, fill in the blank. But all they're doing is living out their subconscious programming just like you. Any new information in this election cycle wasn't filtered through some objective lens. It was filtered through how you and they felt about it based on past experiences, beliefs, and values. And again, it's not about what is true for people. It's about what feels true. And fact checking can be difficult when someone is caught in fight or flight. Again, the stress response. And pretty much irrelevant if what someone says feels true. Because if it feels true to you, why would you fact check it? And if you're honest, if I'm honest, how much fact checking did you do for your own side? You did it when the other side said something that you felt was ridiculous, right? And honestly, some of those statements were so ridiculous, you probably didn't even think there was a need to check them. But we got mad when the other side wasn't fact checking. And on the, because watch the news, when your side did say something that wasn't 100% accurate, did you just give them a pass because it was still better than an alternative? I know I certainly did. A friend of mine's mom reposted some nonsense about how Harris's part of her economic policy about capital gains tax would force your grandma or the local teacher to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars on the house that they bought back in the day. And my subconscious brain, immediately did an eye roll. And sure enough, later Facebook marked it as fake news. Now to you and me, it was kind of obvious that wasn't true because it didn't feel like something Harris would do. And it didn't, and it seemed like the easy thing to do would be to just look it up before reposting it. Like just check it before you put it out there. But I wasn't triggered. She was. And based on her beliefs about those liberal Democrats, that's exactly the type of thing Harris would do to screw over hardworking folks like her. Again, it's not what is true, it's what feels true. So, likewise, over the weekend, my sister got into a fight with some white guy named Chad on Facebook in a moment of weakness. And she texted me in a huff because Chad said people are just as scared of Harris as people are of Trump. Now, if you voted for Harris, you probably think that's ridiculous. I mean, maybe you don't love all her policies, but why would anyone be scared? But here's the thing, and I mentioned this to my sister, Chad's right. Some people truly feared a Harris presidency based on the very consistent messaging about liberals, about her agenda, and what they want to do to this country. And if you listen to Trump's talking points, how many were designed to create fear? How many statements and stories were focused on telling people their way of life was in danger? And the problem is, just like for you, that once someone goes into a stress response, fight or flight, the prefrontal cortex goes offline. It shuts down. And we've talked about this in many occasions and earlier in this exact episode. Forget about the ability to research, fact check, assess data, because that person's brain literally can't. And I say all of this because blaming people simply isn't helpful. In part because most people don't even know why they voted the way that they did, other than it felt right. Facts and objective truth don't really factor in at all. And if you've been taught and lived around folks who believe liberals are ruining the country by letting unlimited illegal aliens into the country, brainwashing their children, giving handouts, while hardworking Americans struggle, how would you vote? And I know you want to argue with me, but this candidate was so hypocritical to everything that that party is supposed to stand for. Shouldn't that make a difference? Not if you're legitimately scared of a Harris presidency. Your brain's number one job is to keep you safe. And it is more important to your subconscious to assume the threat is real versus risking it. And then you and your family's survival might be in jeopardy because of some candidate that you don't understand. Because even if you're wrong, you're still alive to say, oh, whoops, I guess there weren't hordes of illegal immigrants at our border on the way to eat all of our pets. It's super easy for us, especially since we work in higher ed, to believe that it's easy for folks to get the facts and critically think about what was said to come to the quote unquote right decision. But if you work in higher ed, you value those things and you have been trained to do those things. It's part of our identity. And just because people technically have access to the same information doesn't actually mean they know how to go through it or understand why they should. While my sister was still engaged with Chad, she asked him to produce a peer-reviewed article to back up his point. And she felt like she'd won because, of course, he couldn't. Now, I don't know Chad, but he likely wouldn't even know how to start that process, and thus definitely doesn't value it as an important source of information. And honestly, by asking for something that seems perfectly natural to us, but ridiculous to him, she just reaffirmed to Chad that she's out of touch with most people's lives and perspectives. All of this to say, yes, it is frustrating and even heartbreaking to know so many Americans feel like they do about some issues that we hold so dear. And yes, some may legitimately be ignorant, racist, misogynistic, homo, transphobic, but not everyone, and not everyone overtly. Most people wouldn't tell you that they didn't vote for Harris because she's a woman. And they may very well believe that. But subconsciously, their brain said, no, ladies can't be president. And the subconscious will always win in the end. If you want different results for yourself or others, you have to change those internal beliefs, AKA stories. And as we just learned, more logic isn't the answer. That's not how we work. And again, I mention this not to excuse bad behavior or folks who do have ill intent to people like us or the people that we care about, but because believing that more than half the country is your enemy is exhausting. Dwelling on how sad or enraging that is doesn't move us forward and it doesn't solve anything. It keeps us stuck. But knowing this allows us to see how much more work needs to be done and that we need to reach people on a different level. And since we now understand that people don't make their decisions based on logic, that gives us new, more effective avenues to explore when we think about how to change minds and hearts. Okay, so that brings us to the moving forward section. So now what? We've talked about how destructive fight or flight is to our ability to think constructively, find creative solutions. We've talked about how we need to move toward action to avoid staying stuck in some of those emotions. So now I have a few suggestions that have helped me. And as luck would have it, we've already discussed them in past episodes of this podcast. So the first one, use your strengths. And first, check in and see which of your talent themes are most triggered by these election results. For me, strategic, context, connectedness. So strategic was very much of the, but this isn't logical opinion. Context was going right to those popular comparisons to the dictators of the not so distant past. And connectedness was like, OMG, everything's going to be ruined. So I acknowledge that. And again, I would recommend that you check in with your talent themes and see how they're doing. But then I shifted what each of those talent themes were focused on. So instead of strategically, this is terrible for the country because of XYZ, I moved to strategically, how can I and the people I care about, including y'all, best navigate what happens next? What are the strategic moves for us? Instead of context focusing on comparisons to Hitler, I refocused it on the differences between that scenario and today. And yes, you know what? Absolutely, there's similarities, but there's more differences than there are similarities. We have to keep that in mind. And then I looked at connectedness. And I looked outside, and it was a beautiful fall day. So I went for a hike. Nature and the world have survived worse than this. There is still beauty, love, and joy in the world, and that can be just as powerful a force. So earlier I mentioned our RAS, reticular activating system. When you only focus on the negative things and how they're going to destroy everything, the terrible things that are to come, that is all you're going to see. But when you refocus your RAS, and again, I'm suggesting using your strengths to help you do that, so that it looks for solutions. It looks for moments of positivity, how people are coming together. Then that changes your outcome and your outlook. Because then you're searching for different things. You're putting your energy into action and moving forward, just like Boss suggested. So check in with your talent themes. If they're being triggered, help them reframe and refocus. And then ask yourself, how can you use your strengths, some of your most powerful tools, to create a plan for you, your team, and the people you care about? All right. Again, looking forward, seek deeper understanding. Now, in one of my earlier drafts, I titled this section Stay Informed, but there's too much inflammatory media out there. with varying degrees of accuracy. So I changed it because this isn't about scanning the news, scanning social media. What I'm really talking about is looking to better understand people, processes, and reality. And not objective reality and not logic, but what's really happening and what really could happening, what is already there. So I already mentioned Rory Sutherland's book Alchemy, and I haven't even gotten through the whole thing, but already I love it, and it was helpful in this episode, helping me refocus. And I think it's just a great way to better understand human nature because, again, our instinct is why are you ask, why are people doing things that don't make sense, that are not logical? Well, once you understand, not that it makes it completely less frustrating, but once you understand people aren't logical, you're like, oh, well, great, then people are nailing it. Um, you know, but I recommend the book. It's a great way to better understand how people decide, which is topical, of course, but as an added bonus, it can help you better understand and influence your staff and students. So seek information about policies, procedures that you don't understand. And this is a little bit of context again, but looking back, what did Trump actually accomplish in his last term? Other than getting us riled up all the time. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't good. And a lot of negative things came out of it. But how much was us getting worked up about things that he said he would do? And maybe even did for a time, but they eventually got defeated in court. Do we have a wall across the border of that Mexico paid for? We don't. And I don't ignore the fact that the past administration did many things that negatively impacted us, our students, and vulnerable populations. But again, the minute we get triggered by that and go into fight or flight about something that he just randomly says, proposes, or even gets passed, we become ineffective to ourselves and others. Instead, take the time, do some research to find out what actions you can take to either change it or protect the people that it could impact until things can change. It's a better use of your energy. And finally, as you expected, we're going to talk about self-care. And I don't even want to spend much time on it because I've done so many episodes on it already. And I would encourage you to go back and listen to some of those if you'd like to go deeper. But in a nutshell, the quality of your life and your ability to do meaningful work is going to substantially diminish if you can't keep your nervous system regulated. And you can't do that if you're not taking care of yourself. In fact, I'm sure there are many people who hope we exhaust ourselves from worry and anxiety because it means less actual meaningful resistance for them. You need to take care of yourself so you can bring your best to the world. You also need to do it so you can role model this for your team and students. You need to take care of yourself because that's how we fight where we need to fight, and that's how we create deep and lasting change. So I'm going to wrap up this episode not with more words from me, but some from the amazing Audre Lorde. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare.